Welcome back, everyone. Today was game number 13 of the World Chess Championship match being played between Jan Nepomniachtchi of Russia and Ding Lirean from China. Now, as you guys know, Nepo lost a heartbreaker in game 12, a game which he probably could have won and won the World Championship title. Alas, it was not meant to be. Ding won the game, and the match is all tied at 6, and they play game 13 today without any rest. So let's see how Nepo would respond. Alright, so Nepo playing with the white pieces, game number 13, and the game starts with e4. We get e5 from Ding, very standard, what we expected. Knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, and now we get a6, bishop a4, knight to f6, castles, and bishop e7, and d3. Now this is what Nepo has been playing throughout the match. He chooses to play it once again in his final white game of the match, the closed Spanish. Ding plays b5. We get bishop to b3, we get d6 here, and now c3. Once again, d6 is a critical move. If white were to play a move like h3, after knight to a5, black can trade the knight for the bishop, and black is actually a little bit better. And so you have to push a pawn, and d6 is also important because if you go knight a5 here, you'd lose the pawn on e5. So we get d6 to support, and then play knight a5 next move. Here we get c3, creating a square for the bishop on c2. We get castles, h3, which stops bishop g4, creating the pin, and now we have bishop b7. Now again, all this has been played before in the match so far, but here we get to move bishop e3. Now in a prior game which Nepo won, I believe it was game number 4 of the match, although I could be wrong since there have been so many games, he played this move a4, and after knight to a5 we had bishop to a2, c5, and this move bishop to g5 in a very nice game which Nepo won. So Nepo chooses to play bishop e3 instead. Very quiet, safe move. Game continues with knight to a5, and we get bishop to c2 here, and now c5. Idea here is very simple. Black wants to try to prevent white from getting the big center with d4. Additionally, at some point, black might even want to play d5 himself and try to create this great wall of pawns on the 4th rank. So we get knight bd2, and now rook to e8 is played, and here this move a4. Now a4 is a move that maybe isn't necessary perhaps, but the idea is simply that down the road, white wants to play for d4, but white also wants to play on the queen side as well. So when you go a4, what you're doing is you're potentially opening up the a file. So if black plays b4 to keep it closed, after takes and a move like knight to b3, if knights come off, suddenly your bishop is great again. You can also even play d4 here, and now black doesn't even have a move like knight c4, which would happen in the game. So a4 is a move to basically open up the file, sort of waiting move to see what black does. Ding plays h6 here to stop any tricks with like bishop g5 or knight g5 down the road, and now we get the move d4. Now d4, very logical move, simply opening up the center of the board here, trying to create some kind of center here. If white could put the pawn on d5, for example, white would be better, but Ding, who's played a lot of these systems before, understands that you cannot allow that to happen. So Ding trades all the pawns up on d4, and now we reach this position where you have this potentially weak pawn on d6 versus this weak or strong pawn on e4. We get knight to c4 played by Ding. Excellent move because this knight is on the rim. It's not really in the game here. So when you play knight c4, what you're doing is you're trying to remove one of the defenders with a pawn on e4 here, and additionally you're getting rid of your knight on the rim. And also if white trades, suddenly you don't have this weakness on b5, whereas here you do have this potential weakness where, let's just say you go rook f8 after takes, you're simply down a pawn. So when you play knight c4 here, you're getting rid of the knight on the rim, you're getting rid of a white defender with a pawn, and you're getting rid of the weakness with this pawn on b5. So we get knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, and now of course the pawn on e4 is under attack twice by the bishop and the knight, and only guarded once by the bishop on c2. Game continues with f3. Now this is apparently a fairly serious mistake, but it's hard to show exactly why, or prove exactly why, I should say. Now what should have been played by Nepo was this move queen to e2 here, attacking the pawn on c4, and the reason is fairly dank, and that's because here if black plays a move like rook to c8 guarding the pawn, now you can play this move f3, and after black plays bishop f8, you can go bishop f2, and now if black plays d5, there's e5 here, and after knight d7 f4, white is actually a little bit better. Now you're probably wondering, well, what's the difference? The difference is that here, when you go f3 right away and black plays bishop to f8, now you no longer have time to play queen e2 attacking the pawn on c4, because I don't have to play rook c8 here. I can instantly go d5, guarding the pawn on c4, putting pressure in the center, and you don't have e5 here because you simply drop the pawn. So in this position, after bishop to f8, we get bishop to f2 being played by Nepo, and it's quite simple. Now on d5, you can always take the pawn, and the bishop isn't hanging. Here we get d5, which is the best move. Nepo takes, Ding takes, and now we have this move bishop to e4. Now at this point, black is significantly better if he can find the right move. But it's interesting that in one of the previous games, Ding was able to find a very quiet move that was extremely good 2 games ago, which was this unusual looking move rook to b8. Now in this game, he is unable to find the move. If he had found this move, he probably would have retained pretty good chances to win the game. I don't want to say he would have won, but he would have been better for sure, because here the main point is that now the rook guards the bishop. So let's just say white plays king h1. First of all, you can play knight f6 and trade the bishops on b7, and also your rook is now targeting this weak pawn on b2. So that's the first reason. The other reason is you can also go bishop to a8, putting pressure on the pawn on b2 this way, and now you keep the bishop on the board on a8. So rook b8 would have been a very good move by Ding. He would have kept an advantage. I think he would have won the game. I mean, who knows? Obviously it's a little bit of spoiler, but it's all good. So instead, Ding plays the move rook to e5. Now I actually like rook to e5 because it might not be the best move according to the computer, but it starts to create some complications. Game continues with rook to c1, attacking the pawn on c4. Here Ding plays rook to c8, simply guarding the pawn, and now we get knight to e2. Now in this position, once again, Ding has a very good opportunity to prove an advantage, but he plays this move queen e7, which is a slight mistake. Now again, I'm not going to fault Ding for this move. I think it's a completely reasonable move, but it's interesting to note that the computer thinks that after queen to e8, black is actually quite a bit better because the pawn on a4 is weak, the bishop is still under attack, but more importantly, your rook is always going to have a square to go to. And if white tries to play queen d4, following up like he did in the game, after f5 and bishop to g3 here, black is actually winning because of this move bishop to c5, which pins the queen and the king, rook guards the bishop, and it's GG. So in this position, when Ding plays queen e7, it's not a bad move, but he intends to sack the rook. But there's also another point, which is after queen d4 and f5 is played, white can play bishop g3 here, attacking the rook, and you'll notice the queen on e7 is in the way of the bishop, so you no longer have this bishop c5 idea to win the queen on d4. Game continues with rook takes e4. He sacks the rook, takes, queen takes, and we reach this end game where white now has a rook versus a bishop and a pawn, but black is doing quite well. First of all, he has the bishop pair, but additionally this pawn on e4 is potentially a passed pawn. Black can even go knight to b4, knight d3 down the road and get the bastion, and it's very tricky for white to play potentially. So here Nepo plays rook fd1. Now at this point, when I was watching the game, I felt it already here. It's probably going to be a draw. I think Nepo is going to feel some danger and he's going to have to simplify. Knight b4 played by Ding, pawn is guarded by the bishop, and now you can create the bastion with knight to d3. We get rook to d7, bishop to c5 check, king to h2, and now bishop c6. Another excellent move. Active bishops on c5 and c6 here, targeting both the diagonals. Rook cannot stay on the 7th rank here. You can't put the rook on a7 or e7. Bishop covers both squares. Bishop on c6 covers b7. You'd love to go bishop e5 and win the rook, but you don't have time. So rook c7 is played here by Nepo. We get rook takes rook, bishop takes rook, and now we get the move bishop to d5. Logical move here because it simply protects both the pawns on d5 and e4, and also if you lose either of these pawns on c4 or e4, you will just lose the game. So we get bishop to d5 being played, and now we have knight to c3 played by Nepo. Ding goes knight to d3. Now already here it is possible that you could try a move like bishop c6, but this would actually be a big blunder because after knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, and rook takes c4, spaghetti-o, you're losing something. You can't guard both of these bishops, you can't guard the knight as well, and so you have to be a little bit careful. Now Ding obviously not going to be complacent at the stage we're in an endgame, plenty of time to calculate, and it's really a very basic tactic, one of the only tactics that exists in this position. So we get knight to d3 played here by Ding, and now Nepo plays rook to c2. And this move simply guards the pawn on b2, and you want to maybe put the rook on e2 and go after the pawn. But there is one fundamental problem here that Nepo has, which is that in a perfect world, what you'd love to do is you'd love to be able to bring this king closer to the center. But the problem here is that the knight on d3, which cannot be dislodged here, is simply preventing your king from going to either f4 or f2, and so your king is simply out of the game. It's just boxed out by the knight on d3, and so white really doesn't have a whole lot going on. Again, if you could magically get the king to how do I do this? Let me set it up randomly. If you could magically get a position like this where the king is on e2 after a move like a5 and bishop b6, for example, if black moves bishop, you can maybe even try to bring the king in here and go after both of these pawns, and you'll notice that white has very good chances to win the game. But the problem here is that with the knight on d3, you can never really get the king to the e2 square. You can't go to g1 either because the bishop on c5 covers it. So with the knight and the bishop combo here, knight covering these two squares and the bishop covering the g1 square, there's really no way to get your king in the game, so white doesn't have very good winning chances. So we get a5 being played here. Now we have king to f7 played by Ding. We get rook to e2, attacking the pawn on e4, and now let's move knight to c1 is played. Now at this point already, Nepo has resigned himself to the fact that he thinks the game is going to be a draw, and he does not want to take a whole lot of risk. Now, it's worth noting that, as I said before, if you go king g3 and e3 occurs, again, very hard to get anything going here. It starts to look a little bit scary here. If you go knight e2 and black plays bishop takes g2, you do have rook takes c4, I guess. If you were to take the bishop, there's a fork with knight e1, and after rook takes c4, bishop f1, king to f3. Apparently white is okay here, but it looks really scary. First of all, the bishop covers the fork on e5. After knight e1 king g3, apparently black has to go knight d3 and white has to go king f3 and make the repetition. But to even allow this with the white pieces is insane considering the situation. Let's not forget, Nepo lost yesterday. Psychology does play a role. So because Nepo lost yesterday, he wants a game where there's very little risk of things going wrong, and obviously mentally he's going to be quite shaky, so he doesn't want to allow this. So Nepo does not play king g3, and I don't fault him one bit. He plays rook to e2, and now we get a repetition after knight c1, rook to e1, knight to d3, rook e2, knight c1, rook e1, and knight to d3. Now the computer also felt that in this position after knight c1, king to e6 is another move that can be played by black here. But it's very risky to play king e6 because first of all, it just hangs a pawn. Secondly, from Ding's perspective, it's the same thing. Ding is in a situation where he knows he has the white piece in the final game of the match in game 14. Why do you want to take a big risk here and potentially lose the game when you're going to have your chance with white? You're going to have a chance to win, finish the match in style. Why would you do this? So king e6 is playable, and actually after takes and king d5, rook d8, knight takes b2, this does feel quite scary for white here, and I honestly would not want to play this position with the white pieces. Nonetheless, considering the situation, having white knowing what's going on, very hard to play a move like king e6, trying to keep the game alive here, because you just know that Nepo is going to have to make the draw when you play knight c1, and you'll go into the final game with white and chances to win the whole thing. So after we get these moves, knight c1, knight d3, back and forth, the game does end in an unfortunate quick draw, relatively speaking, and the match is tied at 6.5. So what does that mean? That means that after tomorrow's rest day, they will play the final game, game number 14, on Saturday. Ding Lirean will have the white pieces. Jan Nepomniachtchi will have the black pieces. If Ding wins the game, he wins the match immediately. If he wins with the white pieces, he wins the match. Same thing for Nepo. Nepo wins the game with the black pieces, he wins the match. If the game, however, is a draw and we are tied 7-7, there will be a tiebreaker that will be played on Sunday. I believe it will be, I think it's going to be 4 games of rapid chess. I could be wrong on this, of course, but I believe it's going to be 4 games of rapid chess. Now, what do I think will happen? So first of all, nobody knows what's going to happen in game 14, but based on the players, based on what I feel are the lack of opening ideas at this point, this is something that Fabiano also commented on in the official commentary. It feels like both players are kind of out of ideas at this point in the match. So I'm expecting game 14 to be a draw. I am expecting tiebreakers, and I do think that if we get to tiebreakers, the advantage has to be for Nepo. He's played more rapid and blitz. He's played a lot of the Grand Chess Tour events, which Ding has not played in for quite some years now. So if we get to the tiebreaker, Jan has the advantage. But I do think as of right now, going to game 14, Ding is the favorite because he's the white piece in this final game. You never know what could happen. We all do remember it, the final round of the candidates. Ding also had the white pieces there in a situation where it was a must win, and he did win against the streamer guy Hikaru Nakamura to clinch a spot and play the match against Nepo for the World Chess Championship. So at any rate, it's going to be quite interesting. We'll see what happens in game number 14. But I do hope you guys have enjoyed this recap. I know it's a little bit light. It's kind of hard when you have a fairly bland, boring draw in the Spanish to say a whole lot. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap. Make sure to hit that subscribe button below if you haven't. And I will be back very soon with a recap after game number 14 of the match. See you guys soon. Bye.